I think this film doesn't work to develop any of these characters rather than just showcase them working together as a team.
Avalon, if you want to push back, feel free. Otherwise, I'll.
Andrew, I think you missed the forest for the trees, because this movie, as a whole, they all have the same flaw in this movie. They all don't work together.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of A Lost Plot, the podcast by storytellers for storytellers, so that we can tell better stories ourselves. As always, I'm your host, Maverick, and today we have back with us our two favorite co-hosts, Andrew and Avalon, to review the first in the Avengers series. That's why we've been building up all of the different reviews, getting them all together so that we could come to that coming together moment that we're here with today. The Avengers, which was released in 2012. The story was by Zach Penn and one of Avalon's favorite, Josh Whedon. His screenplay was also by Josh Whedon and directed by Josh Whedon as well. So, Avalon, you want to give us your overall thoughts and rating on Avengers?
So, Avengers is one of those, like, culmination movies in a way where it's like Marvel was building up to it for years, and no one knew if it was going to be successful or not. And it overexceeded most people's expectations at the time. So watching it again years later, I'd say it still holds up. I still enjoyed watching it this time around. And there's many things I love about it, even more now. It got a solid 7 out of me for my rating, and it actually might get raised higher up because there was a few things I wasn't sure what to give it on, so I gave it midway, but it might raise up because I actually kind of wanted to give it more points on this particular things.
Nice. Andrew, what were your initial thoughts and rating for this film?
I think it's a very busy film. I think they're bringing together a lot of these characters. It's the first of its kind, at least with the MCU, so it's kind of their test run. I didn't think it was a bad movie, but I didn't really give it a ton of points. My initial review ended up being a 3.95.
Wow.
For myself, I felt a little conflicted on some of the points. And I think, honestly, this was one of the few times where I reviewed something and was left with more questions and answers on how other people perceive this film. Partially because I recall watching it when it first came out being like, oh my goodness, this film's amazing and I love this film. And except for one distinct point, which I'm sure we'll get to. And looking back at it, I think there's a lot of questions in my mind, about would this film work if you hadn't watched all the other films around it? Would you still find something about it compelling? And I think that would be interesting to discuss. I personally gave it a 4.45, but I would be willing to raise it. I thought that, honestly, I saw myself as feeling like that was a little low. And part of that is because I think I had more questions than answers by the end of my review of this. So we'll get into that today. If you guys are curious to hear what we have to say, keep listening. We're going to jump right in. But before we get into the actual play-by-play, Avalon, you want to give everyone a summary of what Avengers is all about?
So the Avengers starts with a sort of like a short montage, like a short homage to the Tesseract, like this powerful object and this hints of dark forces gathering. Then we cut to, I forget, it's like the middle Midwest, like this hidden shield base where they're doing tests on the Tesseract. It's acting up, and they're trying to figure out why. It leads to Loki's arrival on Earth, him essentially mind controlling a few people, escaping with the Tesseract while also blowing up the base, but most of the people manage to escape. And that becomes the impetus for the rest of the movie, where Nick Fury gathers these heroes and characters from across the globe to try to hunt down the Tesseract and find Loki and stop him before he unleashes whatever evil he's got planned.
Nice. That's exactly what thrust us into the film. So we're going to get right into it, as we always do, starting off with that opening scene. You see in that first scene the discussion of the Chitauri and their power and what they're planning to do to come to Earth, and how they have this new ally who turns out to be Loki, who then appears using the power of the Tesseract in that base underneath S.H.I.E.L.D.'s control and causes it to collapse, escapes with some of their allies turned to his side, all of that good stuff. What were your thoughts, Avalon, on that opening scene? Did you think it was compelling? Did you think it's not?
So, actually, I just want to briefly discuss, because you mentioned, is this movie like, I mean, because the one thing I was thinking about, like, in terms of, like, does this movie stand on its own? Or is it like, I mean, it is a culmination of the movies that come before it, but could you watch this movie without watching movies before it? Watching it this time around, I kind of feel like you could watch, like, the only movie you might kind of need to watch, maybe, that's a big if, is Thor. You really get an homage, like, opening to Captain America's segment. You don't need, like, his movie before that. You get enough backstory in his, like, opening scene to know who he is. And the same with Tony Stark, Iron Man. Same with Bruce Banner, the Hulk, Natasha Romanoff. I mean, even Clint Barton doesn't really have anything before this movie. So it's like the only one who really has some backstory, and that's only because of Loki, is Thor. And even then, like, there's just enough information dropped in that opening scene about Loki and Thor that I almost feel like, I don't know if you need to watch Thor. I mean, that's the only movie I think you might need to watch before this one, if anything.
Yes, to get what's going on, I think in regards to catching you up as the audience, they do very well without you needing to know stuff.
But I'm sorry, I'm digressing a little bit, but I just wanted to cover that because
no, that's fair. And I think in regards to myself personally, I just recalled walking out of the theater thoroughly enjoying the film, and I think my take, which I was going for, was more so the idea of was a lot of my enjoyment because I had watched all the ancillary work. So this has to be seen as not just a Lord of the Rings trilogy type thing, but more so a anthology type thing where you watch all of this content just to enjoy this particular film, or can this film be enjoyed on its own without having watched all that to the same degree? Like, would you, and I guess maybe this goes to a kind of a weird question that probably would only come up in this specific podcast, but would you give this movie a different rating on the 9 points if you hadn't watched the other previous films or not?
Well, when I was watching this movie, I was actually trying to see, like, because I haven't watched any of the other movies before this recently, at least in the last month or so, and so I was like, well, you know what? Let me just review it, like, watch this with the idea, like, I haven't seen most of the other movies. Is there any missing information from the story? Could I enjoy this without watching the prior movies? And the reality is, you could watch, like, I think there are a few moments where they make homage to past events, obviously, to histories of the individual characters. But the only one where I feel like there might be a little bit of confusion would be, as I said, Thor and Loki, potentially. But even then, it's not like, oh, like, it's completely you confused. It's just like, you get the impression there was something more there. It wasn't like, oh, not like, you were lacking information. So you don't, like, there was just enough information dropped, like, okay, you know who the character is, you know what they're kind of talking about, and it's just enough to keep the story going. So,
I get what you're saying, and so I'm just gonna bypass that opening scene because I think it's just worthy to keep this discussion going where it's at, because this is actually the question I really have as a viewer. Is I think that not necessarily the buy-in of the characters in the explanation. I think the explanation, you could watch this without watching any of the films and understand what's going on, understand who the characters are, understand somewhat at least where they're coming from. All of that makes sense. What I think more so is the idea of the emotional buy-in, where we have already gotten to know Tony Stark, and we love Tony Stark because we've watched Tony Stark in the first and second film. I believe it had already come out at this point. But does that mean that we actually like Tony Stark's character if we hadn't seen those previous movies? Do we think that he's super compelling, or do we just think he's kind of a fun guy or an interesting, quirky character to have in this film if you haven't seen those ones? Or, for example, Thor, right? Do we like Thor as this sacrificial individual who has learned to be sacrificial, coming forward to help save the people of Earth? Or do we just see him as the demigod brother of Loki who decided to come down and have a feud with his brother because he's pissed off at him, right? Et cetera, going down the line of the other characters. How do we emotionally experience this person in this film, and do we experience it differently because? And I don't even know if that's fully a question that can be answered here because all of us have already watched all of these other films, right? Maybe it's a question that we can't answer here, but I think it's at least something worthy to take a stab at. That's kind of where I was coming with it. And the reason I'm coming at it with it is because I kind of don't think that some of these characters are developed much or at all in this film. I mean, you already have Tony Stark being the guy who's like, oh, I want to poke fun and figure things out and mess with people. And he continues to do that in this film, but it's not like he's particularly doing it for a specific cause. He's more just there because Nick Fury asked him to be there, right? Captain America probably has more so of that, but like Romanov is kind of discussed that she has these issues, but then she's using it as a facade.
Are we talking about
Loki.
Are we just
sorry, the main characters. The main characters, yes,
Okay.
you're right. I'm talking about like what are their motivations that make them distinctly more developed in this film compared to the other films. And maybe that's just something I should open up at this point and have a discussion about rather than jumbling my thoughts. So, Andrew, you clearly have some thoughts on this. I want to toss it to you, and then I want to hear Avalon's counter to that because I'm sure he will disagree with you.
So, on the note of the characters, one of the biggest reasons this film gets such a low rating for me is because this ends up being an ensemble. And I see it almost similar to how Eternals was when we reviewed it. There are so many characters we're trying to cover that we don't end up covering any one or even two characters in an in-depth manner, right? Think about what are their flaws, really. Steve has this displacement in time. Iron Man has arrogance. Bruce Banner has fears about the Hulk. Which I'll grant, okay, we've got some semblance of flaw here. Then the question becomes, do they work through those flaws? And I'm not even going to consider Hawkeye and Black Widow to be main characters in this movie because they get
that's probably fair.
They get next to no development.
But I think that's probably fair.
Yeah, and I'll say Thor probably is, considering Loki's the villain, and you've got some sort of family feud going on there. But at that point, Thor has no development. He doesn't change as a character at all, especially when you take into account all of his development takes place in the first Thor movie. And he is the same exact person he is at the end of Thor 1, at the beginning of this film, and at the end of this film. The only thing that changes is that he knows Loki's alive, and he's taking him for judgment back on Asgard. So I don't even consider him to have any sort of development in this film whatsoever. I would say that Iron Man, Captain America, and Hulk have some level of development, but because it's so minimal, I think the story falters. Iron Man, still pretty arrogant by the end of this film. He sacrifices himself to save the world. We've already seen that type of transformation in the first and second Iron Man movies. This is nothing new. With Hulk, he accepts the rage within him, but this is something that happened at the end of the first Hulk film. With Captain America, he's a man lost in time. I think Captain America might have the most compelling, but then the question becomes, does he actually change in this film, even though this is a new type of struggle he's having? I don't think he really does. He's still Captain America. He still stands for what he thinks is right. His morals aren't really put to the test here. He already likes working as a team. He's already a natural-born leader. I think this film doesn't work to develop any of these characters rather than just showcase them working together as a team.
Avalon, if you want to push back, feel free. Otherwise, I'll...
Andrew, I think you missed the forest for the trees. Because this movie, as a whole, they all have the same flaw in this movie. They all don't work together. Sure, Captain America might have worked in a team setting before, but it's all military-based, all people of a like mind in a military setting. When he's pulled out of that military setting, these are all people who are not military people, and they don't work with him, and he has trouble with that. Same with Tony Stark. He's arrogant. He doesn't like listening to people. You have Bruce Banner, who wants to be left alone. He doesn't want to be working with people either. You have Thor, who's a prince, more or less. He doesn't want to be working with these people, too. He just wants to get his brother back. And then the only person in the group who's like maybe working a little bit, but it's only because she has to, is Natasha Romanoff. She clearly has misgivings about the Hulk, at least. But they all have their own flaws in their own ways, where it's like they don't want to work together as a team, and by the end of the movie, they have to come together, overcome the prejudices they have, and learn to stand united against a common threat. That's, I think, the themes and ideas of this movie And the idea that the reason I think this movie works is because they have the same flaw. Because they're not all like, sure, you have an ensemble, but they're all working through the same problem, though from different angles, from the same place. So they're not. This is, and they all have to work through that flaw. And sort of like, sure, they have these other flaws, but those aren't the major flaws of their characters. Those are just them being human, is what I would argue. So, and that's just regarding their flaws. If you're talking about their motive, I think they all have an excellent motive to be there as well. So, I don't know if you want to cover that now or Maverick.
That would be the appropriate time, yeah.
So, I mean, the reality is, Bruce Banner is there because he's an expert on gamma radiation, so they hire him to go find the Tesseract. Tony Stark is a genius, and he is a consultant already for S.H.I.E.L.D., so they bring him in as to help within this cause of finding the Tesseract. Steve Rogers has experience with the Tesseract. He already has, due to his days in Hydra, in fighting the Red Skull, he has experience with it as a Hydra weapon, so they bring him in as well. Thor is trying to get back his brother Loki back, and so he has invested interest in this whole situation, so he's got motive for being there as well. And then you have Natasha Romanoff, who Clint Barton's been brainwashed by Loki, and so she's trying to get Clint Barton back, so she has vested reason to be there as well.
Right.
So,
well, and honestly, like the threshold for being invested in the plot doesn't have to be as high as you're making it out to be, where they have these huge internal motivations for it to be a compelling story, in my opinion. Right. The very fact that Natasha is an employee of S.H.I.E.L.D., right, and is required to work for them, would be expected to show up at the job site because that's what her role is, makes perfect sense to me. The idea that Tony Stark's consultant already makes sense as well.
Well, you brought it up already in the opening thing. That's why I brought up the motive.
Oh, yeah. No, sorry, I was talking about backstory, more related stuff in the opener, which was why I was concerned. But yes, I think in regards to motivations for being there, the only one that I actually had serious questionable thoughts about was Bruce Banner, just because he actually has huge reservations for being there throughout the entire time. And the fact that he's like, oh, well, I'm an expert in gamma radiation, I guess I'll just risk everyone's lives because I'm an expert in gamma radiation, seems like a little questionable. But I mean, that's like more of a side thought in my mind. And if that was my big issue with the film, that's not a reason to not like the film. Like that's next to nothing. So the reason, and I think they knew that was the weakest one, which is why they spent so much time on bringing him into the role compared to everyone else, where everyone else is just like, tag, you're it, get over here. And they actually have a whole scene where they're trying to convince him to come. So, I mean, all in all, was not a big issue for me. It was more of a thought. So, Andrew, I see you're sitting there with your own thoughts, so go ahead, feel free to push back.
So I do want to address the motives as well as development in the characters themselves separately. The motive, I think, is functional. I just don't find it that compelling or interesting. It is simply you work here, so you're going to help us out of necessity sort of situation, which works for the film. It doesn't take points off, but I'm not adding points to it for it, if that makes sense. When it comes to the character's development, I think you make the point that they all have this flaw of working together, thus it's a problem. If this is the theme and the flaws that the characters have, I find it completely non-compelling for the film. And if that is truly the theme here, then it means all other Avengers films would completely fail because they'd all have to have the same exact flaw in order for the film to function based on all of the other team-up movies we've reviewed. Eternals is the best example of this. We have different characters with different motivations, and it doesn't function because we're trying to focus on so many characters. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the argument you're going for is the reason this film works.
That's for this particular film, not for Eternals or for all the Avengers films.
Okay.
That was not my argument.
So your argument
is just for this movie. Just for this movie. Not for any of the other Avengers.
That it doesn't work at all because it makes all of the characters basic, non-compelling, and it's a film just to get the Avengers together. And it worked, right? We were in the early days of superhero films. Everyone wanted to see the Avengers together. So I understand why the film works in the time that it was created. I don't think any superhero film would ever work in a similar way absent that timeline, absent it being this newborn superhero cinematic universe.
I would actually disagree with you, Andrew. I don't think that that is a reason to say that the. I mean, it's basically saying, well, I don't like this theme, so I don't think this movie's compelling because I don't like the theme that they're presenting, which I think is, frankly, not a reason to give the theme a bad rating. But also beyond that, the idea that they take the same theme and have different people approach that same theme from different angles, I think, is a great way to take disparate characters and create a compelling, cohesive issue that ties them all together. Is like how they each approach the same issue from different dynamics and have to address it to work together to create the solution to the issue at hand, right? And I think in regards to making a compelling team up story, it actually is a great idea to try to create that compelling story. Is it super complex? No, I'm not going to say it's a super complex movie, but neither is The Lion King, and The Lion King's an amazing movie. So I don't know that you need to have a super complex story to make a compelling story. And I think in this case that the idea that they were dealing with the same issue from different vantage points because they have so many characters addressing the same issue is not a reason this movie falls on its face.
I don't think my point was it falls on its face because I don't like the theme. I think it does. Well, and secondly, I think, like I said, I gave it essentially a 4, which is a little less than middle of the road in the 9-point system. I don't think it's a terrible movie. I just don't think it's a great movie. And I think the problems lie in the fact that the characters don't truly change and evolve as the story progresses outside of, oh, we kind of do our own thing, and oh, out of necessity we're gonna kind of work together here at the end of the film. And what was the proxy for that? I think there are 2 of the most compelling parts of this movie, and that's Loki and Agent Coulson's death. I think that those 2 things are what make this movie good rather than bad. And I think that Agent Coulson's death is the only part of the character development we see in any of the protagonists, if we will. And it being so far removed from each of them is one of the reasons I have trouble rationalizing it outside from maybe Iron Man and Captain America. But like Thor and Banner are so far detached from Coulson, it's kind of a question of why are they even why the change now? And so
Sure. So yeah, I see how where this is going, and I think that you're bringing up some interesting points. What might be effective at this point? Well, so I go back and forth because that would undermine the very idea that Avalon's driving for. So, sorry, I'm thinking mid fly of the best way to address this film. I want to see, because in some ways, right, you say these characters aren't compelling, but they have a whole monologue for some of the characters where they do discuss some of the issues at hand. And for example, with the Incredible Hulk is probably the big one, where they're having this discontinuity between everyone in the group, and then you see the Incredible Hulk saying, "Oh yeah, you created that thing because you're scared of me turning into the thing," and then he has that whole thing about what you think you can kill me? I can't. I already tried, right? And then he tried to put a bullet in himself, right? That's a huge revelation in regards to his character about who he is and what he's going through and what he's struggling with as an individual. And I would argue that that's far different from what we've seen from him previously, even if you do acknowledge the whole previous Bruce Banner / Hulk movie that came out that, in my opinion, is so disparate from this one that I find it hard to reconcile the 2 as the same person. But if you do, that's perfectly understandable. But I think that in and of itself shows development that's distinct from development that we were seeing in the other characters in the film. Now, I don't think that it's like, going back to what Andrew's saying, I don't know that any of the character development here was like incredible, right? But it's also, in my opinion, because you are going for this broader overarching themes that Avalon was talking about, where all of them learn to work together. And so the fact that they all do learn to work together by the end of the film isn't exactly surprising. It isn't exactly like a world-changing revelation that makes everyone significantly learn huge lessons, other than, yeah, you guys do need to work together. That was the whole point of this. So I would, even with that, give it middle of the road, but I still think the point is there and that they exist in the film. Avalon, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
So no, I agree with you. This movie isn't super complex. I agree with that statement, but I also agree that the movies and stories don't have to be super complex to be good stories. And you're right. For the sake of the story, like the conflicts, the character development doesn't have to be that much. But for the sake of the story and the themes, it works for this movie, and that's why I really like it. Is because it
Hmm.
gets its point across. It does have a theme and a message, and it worked. And like even though it's all these disparate characters, it's unique enough for each character when they come together that it's not like copy paste from each character. It's like they all have their own motive, characterization that drives them to this point and drives them to the climax of the movie. So.
Yeah, yeah. And so maybe just as a little framework for how I'm viewing things, because in my mind, I gave this like what, a 4.5
Mhm.
thereabouts. And in my mind, I probably would even now in the middle of the discussion, I'd probably bump it a little bit higher because Alan's brought up some points I didn't even think about. Um, I would personally like the decent movie is what I consider this to be. Like it's a solid movie. I don't know that it's my favorite movie. I think there's much better Avengers movies out there, but like this one is still very enjoyable, and there's a reason to rewatch it.
Mhm.
Uh, in my mind, it's in that decent band goes from like 4.5 to 6.5. Anything above that is like truly excellent, and anything below that is I'm probably never gonna watch it again unless I have to.
Mhm.
So anyways, if that's helpful for anyone out there, that's where I'm at.
Mhm.
But it's definitely like in the middle or higher tier of the like decent movies in my mind. So go ahead, Andrew.
So you bring up Lion King, and I think it's an interesting comparison. Because while Lion King, yes, is simple, it has the essential parts that you require to make a truly good movie. And the difference there with the transformation for Simba is the idea of internal versus external pressures. With Simba's character, the external pressure towards the end of the film is Scar's taken over Pride Rock. We need your help. But the internal pressure hasn't changed. Thus, he doesn't want to go and help and he runs. When he finally does go to help, it's the internal that has finally shifted and caused him to go and make that decision. In this movie, the internal for every single character never shifts. The external shifts in that they realize, well, we can't make this mission work if we don't work together. The bad guys show up again, so we have to work together now. There's no real conflict amongst them that actually causes a character shift for any one of the singular characters. And so while I agree they go from not working together to working together, and this can work as a basic plot device, I don't think any of the characters truly shifts internally by the end. The only one I think you could argue for would be Hulk, in that he somehow controls the anger within him. But the idea that he can just show up all of a sudden and say, oh, I'm always angry, means that one, he never needed to change anyways, because he could always control the Hulk. And two, even if he couldn't, I just feel it's very contrived to have him all of a sudden be able to control the Hulk at the end of the film.
Yeah, I mean, I think your argument about internal or external pressures, first off, isn't a deal breaker for whether or not a movie is good or not. Characters can still have learned something throughout a time, whether or not their internal pressures change. Secondarily, there actually was internal change in this film, and you see that with Captain America, where he has that argument with Iron Man, and then he breaks into a room in the middle of their flying saucer machine and finds all of these machines that were Hydra-esque weapons that they were building using the Tesseract. And when he reveals that, he has an internal shift that goes, okay, you know what? I need to stop arguing with Tony. He's right. We need to work together. I need to stop touting the party line here because I was actually in the wrong. And so, even though I don't think that internal pressures are necessary, you actually see that there is changes within this film, and that's demonstrated by that scene.
So I guess my question then for you is, with this internal change, right? You're pushing for this idea that our Captain America does have an internal shift here. Do you think that internal shift actually goes to the overall arc at the end where it says Captain America now works with people, or is he still working with Iron Man just because his perception of Shield has changed and now he says, "Oh, I like Iron Man," versus actually being a team player?
I think some of that is a question of inference, right? And that's where you would have to argue for something that's not maybe as explicit as you would want in the film, either for or against. I think some of that could play into Agent Coulson as well, right? And the discussions that they'd had, because clearly Tony Stark had a care for him because he's had a lot of interactions with Agent Coulson throughout the years, and they really try to build that up, especially with Captain America, when he sees the playing cards and he's talking to him about how much of a fan he is and all that kind of stuff. And so the idea they both come together over this common denominator could be made and say that they actually have some bond outside of just saying it's for the good of the group. I don't know if that's clearly spelled out. It would be up to the audience to infer that in their minds, which that's one of the vagueness of telling a story, right? What you want to attribute that to, sometimes it is explicit, sometimes it's not. And I'm personally okay with it.
Sure. I think in my mind, I just separate the two because the massive shift they present in the movie for all the characters is Coulson's death. And that scene happens long before that. So in my mind, it wasn't even a part of his character arc in the shift.
It's building up. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, I would argue that that's his shift in regards to Nick Fury, which you see play out even further when you have Captain America 2. But,
yeah. And I think at that point, I'd be willing to buy Captain America has some internal shift. I don't know that that's an argument for the other characters, though, at that point, especially Hulk and Iron Man. Or not Hulk and Iron Man, Hulk and Thor.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree that Hulk's probably one of the weakest characters, in my opinion, in this film. But I also don't think Hulk's generally one of my favorite characters in the series, so I'm maybe slightly biased against him. Thor: Love and Thunder should not exist. So, go ahead, Alan.
Yes.
I mean, you're talking about internal shifts and internal, change. I mean, the reality is, I thought I already mentioned this, but the idea is that there is a little bit of an internal, change. And the reality is, I mean, sure, Captain America has worked in team settings before, but it was all strictly military-based team settings. These are not, and the question is, can you work in a team setting outside of that with people who are disparately, very different from who he is and from the military? And the same is, with Tony Stark, who's always been, kind of a solo act, a millionaire, does whatever he wants kind of thing. Can he actually slow down and work with other people kind of thing? I mean, I just could go through each of them. I don't know if you want me to go through all of them or not. I just, but I say there is. What?
No. I mean, and you went over those before.
Yeah.
So
no, I just say there
fair.
is internal. I do think there is internal shifts with the characters. I just because they and the reality is they don't they keep trying to hold on to their prejudices or to their ideas of how things should work. It's only when Coulson dies that they suddenly have this moment this is not helping anything. And so that it's only then they kind of in a internal sense give up their own ideas of how things should be to come alongside each other okay, let's work through this and figure this out. And so but it's only when it comes to that moment where someone has died that they know, who was their teammate, Coulson, that they come to that point, okay, we need to give up what we think is important and actually come together on this. So, unite on this.
No, I get what you're saying. Andrew's making the case that that's just not compelling for a majority of the characters in the film. And even though, sure, they might all react, Hulk reacts to the whole thing with Coulson dying, it's did Hulk have, did Thor have any relation to Coulson at all in the film? Not really. So the fact that he's emotionally distraught, if anything, makes you go that's kind of weird. That doesn't make any sense. Why would he care?
So, well, now that I was just thinking about that actually regarding Thor and Coulson, and I just think about in Thor, the first movie, there was interactions between Coulson and Thor in that movie, so it's not like he didn't know Coulson, but that does start to play the idea of okay, is Thor necessary viewing material before watching this movie kind of thing. Kind of, that's all that really comes to mind regarding that. And they do have some interactions in this movie, because he mentions Jane Foster. It's between Coulson and Thor when he mentions moving Jane Foster, and they have this conversation about how they're arguing, Thor confesses that he doesn't like how they're arguing like animals, more or less.
Sure, and I know we're getting like kind of in the weeds and we're bouncing back and forth, but even to play back into what Andrew's arguing, right? What I perceive his argument is that we don't have a reason, a strong emotional reason for people to change how their stances are, like you are saying that they do. And while there is perhaps a reason to believe, even if we buy the motive that this is all a story about working together, and the struggle is they won't work together. Well, why is there an emotional buy-in so strong that all the characters all at once go, you know what? I've changed my mind. We do need to work together despite all of this. And so the idea here is there emotional buy-in from all the characters that they all simultaneously have this change. You can maybe make the case for Romanov and Hawkeye because they work together with Coulson. We just didn't see that. That's off screen, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're going to put those two aside because we kind of assume that they're side characters in this discussion, right? So for the case of the discussion, you have to talk about Iron Man, Captain America, Hulk, and Thor. For the cases of Captain America and Iron Man, I think we discussed those pretty well, and there's at least some agreement, or at least a case to be made, those two could have emotional buy-in based off of what we've seen in this film or films previously. Hulk, I think it's really hard to make that case just because I don't even think he's really met him ever before this film. Even on the ship, you don't really see him interact that much. And then the last question is Thor. My main counter to everything you said about Thor, because it is true that Thor does interact with Coulson, and I know we're getting in the weeds here, but just as a last thought from me, and then I'll shut up. Every time he interacts with Coulson, it's in a professional manner. It's not like they were really friends per se. So he sure it would suck to see him die, but like to be so changed by this that you want to save the world and work together with people you're pissed off at seems not the most believable. But that's all I have to say.
So, I mean, as far as the changes go, I mean, in some ways, I mean, admittedly, some characters change more than others in this movie. I'll acknowledge that.
Sure.
So, obviously, the biggest changes come from Captain America and Tony Stark. I think we all agree on that. In the case of Thor, I think there's a little bit of a change, but also keep in mind, part of his driving motive to be involved in this plot is Loki. So, even with Coulson's death, he is still actively motivated to be involved in the plot because Loki is the one causing all this problems. He is the one threatening and attacking Earth, which he has sworn to protect. So, I mean, regardless of what happened to Coulson, he still has motive to be involved and has reasons to protect Earth because he's already sworn he's going to protect Earth.
And to play maybe even further into Hulk's or into Thor's analysis, his changing point very well may not be Coulson. It very well may be the fact that he tries to stop Loki while he's in that prison chamber. He jumps in, phases through Loki because Loki tricked him and says, when are you going to stop falling for that? And it is more a revelation for Thor that he realizes, I can't do this on my own because I keep trying and I keep messing up. Right. And so you can make the case that that's a completely different shift for him. It's just undermined or overshadowed by Coulson's death, which is a bigger impetus for everyone else in the film.
Yeah. And I agree with that. And as far as Hulk goes, his is a little bit more implicit, or like it's not really explicit, I would say. I mean, the most you could really say is that he was manipulated by Loki, like to turn into the Hulk and to be like his brain. Like not directly, but you could kind of argue that he was put in the situation he was because of Loki, and he joins them in New York because he's like, okay, like part of this whole situation of Loki breaking out was partly his fault, and he's like making recompense for what happened. You could make that argument. Now, I would agree that that isn't as strong a change or motive for him compared to the other characters, but I would still say that's you could make the argument. So
yeah, and I think so. My general takeaway from this, and then I'm going to pass it over to Andrew, is that all of these pieces are there, and we can identify them. And I would say overall, the pieces are strong enough to make the story somewhat compelling and cohesive. That being said, it is very much at the limits of the story's ability to tell, if that makes sense. In that, if you had more characters or more themes they were trying to develop, or any more complex storylines on the side, you probably wouldn't have the ability to portray this as neatly and concisely as they did in this film.
Mhm.
So it's, in my mind, even with everything that we've discussed, I feel like they're there. The motives are there. They're somewhat compelling. They provide an explanation, but they're not the strongest representation of a change for a person that I've seen. Right. So it could have been stronger, but it's still enjoyable. And I still think that it's enough there that I'm willing to argue with Andrew about it. So, I mean, I still think Andrew's wrong and you're right, but I don't think it's like, I don't think that it's like a stellar movie, even with that defense, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Go ahead, Andrew.
So first, I don't dislike this movie. I enjoy this movie, but I think that's the
Andrew
Marvel
thinks this movie's
enjoyer of
trash.
me. Me enjoying a movie doesn't mean that I think the movie's a great movie, though. I think this movie has all the pieces that you need per se, but it's like the idea of if you make an omelet or a hamburger, you can have all the essential ingredients to make that meal, but are you using the best version of those ingredients in that meal? So giving it a 4, essentially a 4 out of 9, is not saying it's terrible, but it's not saying that it's a great meal, is my point. And so the reason it gets some of those critiques, right? The internal versus the external conflict. Another point I think I would add is the question of loss for each of the characters. You have Agent Coulson, who's the biggest loss in this movie. And Mavericks discussed this enough with you, Avalon, and it's been hashed over. I think at this point, the audience understands the characters are loosely tied to Coulson in this film, but he's not someone where if he dies, is going to cause this massive shift in character for each of the protagonists in this film. It will cause some sort of shift, but not a shift that will be this long-lasting impact, as you can clearly see in future movies where they're still having issues and not wanting to work together. When it comes to their working together, I think my point here is that it's an external pressure forcing them to work together. They simply go, we don't work together. We have a problem. We break up. Okay, Loki's invading New York. No, any one of us could stop this problem. So we have to work together at this point. So for the plot's sake, it works, right? When you look at this movie for the themes and the plot and the story itself, the act 1, 2, and 3, if you will, act 1 being we don't like each other, act 2 being we fight and break up, act 3 being we work together to save New York, it functions as an arc in that manner. I don't think it functions for any one of the characters in their overarching plot by the end of the film, though, because 1, they don't truly suffer a loss. 2, there's no true internal change for any of the characters. And I don't remember if there was a 3, but.
So just in response to that, this goes back to what Avalon was saying previously, is that this is, if you will, a meta change for the entire group. And this whole film is trying to discuss a group change rather than individuals changing. And sure, you have to go to the individual level to provide a cohesive story that has those complexities, that delves through those issues. But it's not going to deal with the intricacies that maybe you're asking for, Andrew, in the films that you clearly want to enjoy. And in regards to the idea that this is a lasting impact, the reason that that's undermined is because it's undermined in movies that come after this one, more or less, right? And so that you might say is a flaw with future movies, but you can't blame this on, or blame that on this one specifically and say this one's not compelling because future movies prove this one's not compelling. That's more of a problem with that future movie undermining this one than necessarily this movie having a problem. It's like saying that Game of Thrones season 6 has a problem because Game of Thrones season 8 sucked. Like that's not fair to season 6.
Sure. I mean, I think at the end of the day, you have. I'm not really. I thought this through. I don't know that we're going to change each other's minds on this. And I think the audience has heard enough from all of us. I think the only closing thought I can leave is there are movies where I think they have this similar theme of working together, despite differences that end up being compelling. They may not end in the same way where we're all happy and working together. I think Lord of the Rings Fellowship of the Ring has a good example of people who don't necessarily trust each other, but will work together as the Lord of the Rings progresses. Granted, this is also a much longer screen time you're giving these individuals. I think Guardians of the Galaxy probably is more compelling than Avengers, in my opinion, when it comes to bringing a team together and making them work and having it be this idea of not trusting each other and by the end of the film working together. So, I mean, those are my thoughts when it comes to the characters and their transformation.
Sure. Avon, you have any further thoughts to add on that?
And the only other thing I will say, which I think should be stated for the sake of stories, is that I think, and I'm not saying you were saying this, Andrew, but it came across a little bit this way to me sometimes, some of the arguments you were making. And that is you're expecting characters to be something perfect characters, not flawed, after overcoming this issue. And I would say that characters can have multiple flaws, and especially in this particular context, I think it makes sense for the characters to continue to be like the flawed characters they are in their other ways. They just now have learned to figure out a way to work together in this context, which was the whole point of the movie to begin with. So
yeah, I don't disagree with that.
Yeah, there we go. Well, clearly this film has had many movies come after it, and they're going to actually come out with a new one known as Doomsday in a year or 2 or 3, or who knows if it's been pushed out longer. But it's had some sort of impact. Do you guys think that this particular movie is having a lasting impact? Is there something relevant about the impact it's having that should be discussed?
Hold the phone.
What are your thoughts?
We didn't talk about the villain yet.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's a fair point. Did not remember to bring Loki into this, so yeah, I guess it's fair to discuss now. Andrew, if you want to go into Loki, feel free.
So, I want to start this off by saying I understood that the theme they're going for in this film is teamwork and having the characters work together. I personally did not find that convincing for the characters that were the heroes. I did, however, find that compelling with the character of Loki as the antagonist. And here's why. There's several reasons why I think Loki is probably the best part of this film. One, remembering this film, by the way, I look back and thought of Loki as like, this is probably the most basic film Loki's in, and not finding him all that interesting. Thinking of him in terms of the themes of this film makes him much more interesting, in my opinion, because Loki functions as discord, distrust, chaos, causing problems amongst everyone he works with, but also dominion and domination. And his character, and by the way, I think this is also where I'd slightly disagree with Avalon when he early on said we probably didn't need too many films. I think Loki's character becomes even more compelling when you've seen the first Thor movie. I don't think the other movies are necessary for the heroes, but I think for added depth to Loki's character and making him less stock on the surface, if people have seen Thor, makes Loki more interesting.
That's he actually did. He made a caveat for Thor. Just
okay. I didn't catch that.
Yeah.
So one, I think his performance in this film is great. Not that it adds to the plot. I just have a list here. Two, I think his connection to Thor makes him more compelling than just the stereotypical "I'm here to dominate the Earth" sort of villain. Mm-hmm. The connection to Thor actually makes him more interesting. The symbolism within his character, division and manipulation. The mid-act of the film is where he really shines, the causing division amongst the Avengers. And then the fact that his scepter literally turns people against each other. They don't touch on this a ton in this film. It's brought out much more in Thor: The Dark World, which again, Loki's the best part of that film too, which we've reviewed, and probably the one saving grace of that film. But his confrontation with Natasha Romanoff is where you get to see this vulnerability in his character as well, when she draws out of him this confession almost of what his plans are. And then on top of that, the contrast with each of the heroes. So I think his character is great in contrast to the heroes, in contrast to the themes. I think he works great in relation to specifically Thor. I think Tom Hiddleston does a great job of bringing his performance onto the stage. And not to mention, by the way, his his insecurities, I think, also show in his interactions with the head of the Shatari army when he's talking to that general. I don't even remember his name.
I think he's just called the Other.
Oh, okay, cool.
To be honest, when it comes to movies and storytelling, I'm not as huge a fan of the like relatable villains as much. I like to understand where they're coming from, but I like my villains to be psychotic and to be actually evil, or to be actually come from a place like you might understand them, but you disagree with what they're doing, kind of thing. And Loki fits that perfectly 100% in this movie. Like, and I do appreciate you mentioning, like he is like your typical like I want to rule, I want power, but yes, there's nuance where it's like because of Thor, where it's like he's related to Asgard and to the Asgardians. There's the whole dynamic there. Then you have like even though he is planning to rule, he has this deal in the background with the Chitauri where it's like he's also under pressure, where he's like he needs to deliver the Tesseract to the Chitauri and make good on his deal. Like so, he's not just ruling; he's also like he has things like he's under pressure that we can understand as an audience. So yeah, no, I really like Loki in this movie. I think he's one of the better villains in the MCU as a whole. So yeah, and I really appreciate. And I think he shines in this movie. So
yeah, I mean, I think thus far I have liked all of the villains in the Avengers movies, which we can get into Ultron and Thanos when we get to them. But as far as villains for the MCU, I think the Avengers level villains have probably been some of the best. And as we recently discovered, Vulture was quite compelling as well in the Spider-Man Homecoming movie.
Nice. Yeah. I mean, personally, this is probably my least favorite Avengers villain. I think that my only problem with him necessarily isn't that Tom Hiddleston doesn't do great acting or that by himself Loki's a compelling or uncompelling villain here. I just don't think that it follows the Loki that we see in Thor 1, 2, or 3, in that he is very much more of a sideline, subtle, conniving individual. And in this film, he's very domineering, overbearing, commanding of people, saying, you must follow my rules or else. And there's a few times where you see the classic Loki, and that's when he's like having these discussions with Natasha. But pretty much any other time, he's like, I'm a god, shut up. And that's just not what you see in the other films, where he's very much sly, careful, calculated. Even in the third one, he's unveiled. He's like, oh my goodness, like very protective of himself. Like, aha. He's more of a dainty individual is the impression I got, more than this who is like trying to be on the sidelines because that's where he works best, in the shadows, on the edges of the garments, where he then figures things out, and then all of a sudden he makes his move and takes you out, right? He's not this front of stage character for his general impression. And you see that, like I said, in the first one, in the second one where he appears to supposedly die, and then in the third one with Thor. So I just don't think that it's the same character. And that's what
I would argue that it is, and it's only because if you think about it in the Thor movie, he's only really around Asgardians and people of his type, in a way, like the whole duration of the movie. So that's why he acts the way he does. When he comes to Earth in the Avengers, this is his first time among mortals, and he sees himself as above them. He looks down on them just because he is Asgardian and because they are, like, he lives longer than them, he is stronger than them, he sees himself as superior to them. So he doesn't, like, as a character, he doesn't see the need to be as conniving and as, like, hidden, because he is by nature better than they are already. So it's not until you get to Future, if you're going to start playing to other movies, that he actually starts to see, like, after going through some experiences where he starts to change in regards to how he interacts with other peoples and races and aliens and such. So, but
yeah, I mean, you make. I can kind of see what you're coming from. So, like, I'm not going to make a big deal out of it. But once again, Loki was traveling to other realms where they did see them as gods, right? And he clearly was interacting in the same fashion in those other films than what he was in this film. So I don't know that it's like the strongest argument just because he's on Earth specifically that he acts differently. But sure, I think you could make the case for it. I'm not going to make it a big issue. I just personally don't like him in this film, and I think it's because he's not the same character.
Yeah, I mean, in my mind, the reason Loki's different in this film is because in other films, he relies on conniving tactics, manipulation, deception in order to get the upper hand. And in a one-to-one conflict, he's going to lose against Thor. In his mind, in this film, he's got the backing of Thanos and the Shatari army to fight Thor. And so he's much more emboldened. And that's where you're getting this arrogance from. But absent, like, that's why as soon as Hulk beats the crap out of him, he's like, I surrender, please don't kill me. And you get the old Loki back who's just shaking in his boots. That was my rationale in this film as to why he acted differently.
Yeah, I mean, that's most of the characters in the film. I want to talk about the lasting impact of this now that we've gotten that out of the way. You guys think that this film has a compelling impact on the world? And if there's other characters you want to discuss, feel free. Alvin, go ahead.
I mean, we've already. I mean, as far as the business of storytelling, yes, it has, because in a way, like, this movie has spawned the whole idea of expanded universes and like just like massive team ups between large casts of characters and whatnot for a movie. I mean, other studios have tried to replicate this in the years following, and you've seen like, and the fact that this has gotten like 3 sequels since this last one. I mean, that on its own says how popular this series has been, the Avengers at least. It had enough of a pull to bring people back 3 more times. So I mean, I think people keep, and I'm already seeing people like referencing the Avengers as this like event that happened in storytelling and film history. I mean, it's like, because it really isn't something that's been done that often in terms of filmmaking and storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say that yes, it has had an impact already, and I think it will continue to be remembered just for the impact it's had. So at least the first one. So I won't say the whole franchise, every single movie in this franchise will be remembered. I just know this. I think this first one will be, just because of the impact it had. So
Cool. Andrew, any thoughts on that?
I mean, I think absent the story at all, the fact that this was a successful movie in terms of the financial gain that it brought, as well as being able to successfully produce a film that brought these heroes together, was similar to the Iron Man film in that it's experimental. And Iron Man being successful told them, okay, we can make superhero films in the Marvel universe. And the Avengers film told them we can make team-up films in this universe. And it's what spawned all of the other films that we got. And it ultimately was the beginning of the setup for Infinity War, because we already have the Tesseract present, and it's seen as this instrument that's worthy of an Avengers level threat. And then you put 6 of them together, and now you've got an even bigger threat. So it does a good job of setting up the stakes. And also, right, we talked about this in Eternals. You're setting it up slowly by increasing the stakes as the films progress. And you're keeping the audience hooked by increasing the amount of destructive capability that certain entities have, right? You go to Ultron, who now has the Mind Stone and the it's just the Mind Stone inside Loki's staff, which is also a continuation from this film. And then the next one is arguably Civil War, but we'll bypass that and go to the Infinity Stones. You've got now Infinity War with Thanos bringing all 6 of them together. So
nice. Yeah. And that leads us to today. So Doomsday's coming out. We'll see where it goes.
Now, the only other thing I'll say about Avengers, regarding this type of movie, like, as a movie, I would agree that it's really hard to make a movie about this kind of thing. So I think this would have worked better as a TV show or as a series, where you had more time to explore the different character dynamics. And Joss Whedon, who made this movie, I mean, he's had experience making great team-up series before this. So it was like, and he did phenomenal with this. But I would actually agree, if someone was to argue like this should have been a TV series, I would agree with that statement. I still think it's a great movie, and my score hasn't changed. My rating's still the same. If anything, it's maybe a little bit higher, because Maverick confirmed, like, where I was middle of the road, I just gave it full points because it's something Maverick said. So I was like, okay. But yeah, just wanted to say that.
Sure. No, and I generally agree. Team ups are difficult to do. you would have to do something where it's thematically binding everyone together, like you saw in this one, or you have to do something like Guardians of the Galaxy, where they have a primary character and everyone else kind of circles around them. So that's generally where I think we've seen the most success, but it's definitely a good experiment, and it worked well enough that they've continued with it. So that's what you got today. And I think that's where we'll leave it. So that's the pod. We hope you all enjoyed. We'll be back, as we always are, next week. We'll see you all then.